picture this. It is July, in the year 1505. A young law student is riding his horse through the dense German countryside when the sky suddenly turns just like a bruised, terrifying black.
Oh, yeah. A violent thunderstorm rolls in. And we are not talking about, a little summer rain here.
No, not at all.
Far from it. This is the kind of torrential, bone-rattling storm that completely disorients you.
Right.
And in the 16th century, you don't just see a storm like that as bad weather.
Right.
You see it as the literal, immediate judgment of the Almighty.
And that judgment comes crashing down. A blinding lightning bolt strikes the ground just inches from his horse. He is thrown to the mud in absolute mortal panic.
He's certain he's about to be struck dead.
Exactly. And in that terror, the young man cries out to the heavens, "Help! Saint Anna, I will become a monk!" And while he survives the storm, he actually keeps that desperate, terrified vow.
Yeah, he does.
And in doing so, he inadvertently fractures the entire Western world. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a dense, comprehensive, biographical source text and using it to peel back the 500-year-old myths surrounding that frightened law student, Martin Luther.
It's quite a story.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are searching for the actual human being here. The tensions, the brutal turning points, and the deep contradictions of the man who sparked the Protestant Reformation.
It is a phenomenal text to explore because to truly understand Martin Luther, you have to first understand the immense, suffocating psychological anxiety of the world he lived in.
Right. It was a totally different mindset.
Exactly. This was a society where divine judgment felt as real and as arbitrary as that lightning strike. You lived your entire life under a microscope, basically terrified of stepping out of line.
And reading through the source material, peeling back those layers, it genuinely reads like a high-stakes political thriller.
Oh, absolutely.
So, born in 1483 in the town of Eisleben, Luther's background is actually incredibly relatable. His father, Hans, was a copper miner who clawed his way up to a respectable socioeconomic status.
He worked hard for it.
Yeah, and Hans desperately wanted a return on that investment, meaning he wanted his son to have a lucrative, stable career. He pushes Martin into law school.
A typical parent.
Exactly. But then Luther drops out almost immediately after that thunderstorm. Which begs the question, did a single clap of thunder really make him abandon his family's dreams, or does the biography suggest he was, already looking for an escape hatch?
Well, the source definitely points to a profound pre-existing crisis of conscience. Luther was deeply entrenched in the academic teachings of the time, specifically Aristotelian logic.
Okay.
But he developed a massive love-hate relationship with philosophy. He realized that while reason and logic were fantastic for explaining human law or the physical world, they were completely useless for soothing his spiritual dread. Yeah, human reason couldn't bridge the massive, terrifying gap between a flawed, mortal person and a perfect, demanding deity.
So imagine genuinely believing your innermost thoughts are being actively monitored by an impossible-to-please boss.
That sounds exhausting.
Right, a boss who demands absolute perfection, where no matter how many hours of overtime you put in, you are perpetually terrified of being fired. And, in this case, fired means eternal damnation.
Yeah, the stakes are just a little bit higher than losing your job.
Just a bit. So Luther decides to put in the ultimate overtime. He joins the strict Augustinian order and lives a life of brutal self-punishment as a friar.
Very brutal.
We are talking about severe fasting, praying in the freezing cold for hours, and going to confession so often his superiors were actually annoyed by him.
He was desperately trying to earn his way to a clear conscience, to intellectually and physically work his way into God's good graces. But the harder he tried, the more acutely aware he became of his own flaws.
It just backfired.
Completely. It drove him to the brink of psychological collapse. The source actually provides a devastating quote from Luther about this period. He says, "I lost touch with Christ the Savior and Comforter, and made of him the jailer and hangman of my poor soul."
Wow. Wait, jailer and hangman?
Yeah, jailer and hangman.
When you hear a phrase like that, it completely reorients how you view his later rebellion. He's not fighting an institution, yet he is fighting his own internal terror.
Exactly. He's trapped in his own mind.
Fortunately, his mentor, Johann von Staupitz, recognizes this agonizing spiral. Staupitz essentially tells Luther to get out of his own head, to stop obsessing over his personal sins, and sends him to teach theology at the University of Wittenberg.
And that forced shift into an academic environment is the ultimate catalyst for his breakthrough.
How so?
Well, as Luther begins lecturing on the Psalms and the book of Romans, he starts studying the Bible with fresh analytical eyes, and he stumbles onto a massive theological paradigm shift. He discovers the concept of solified,
Solified.
right, which translates to justification by faith alone.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this exact intellectual spark is the gunpowder that blows up the medieval world.
Oh, big time.
What does solified actually mean for an everyday person living in the 16th century?
To put it simply, it is the radical idea that salvation is a free gift. It is not a wage you can earn.
Meaning you can't buy or work your way into heaven.
Precisely. The prevailing teaching of the Catholic Church at the time was that humans had to actively cooperate with God's grace through good works, rituals, and, well, financial contributions.
Ah, right. The money.
Yeah. But Luther argued the exact opposite. He claimed humans are entirely broken and can do absolutely nothing to save themselves. Righteousness is simply given to you through faith.
So for a man who viewed God as a hangman, discovering that the ultimate judge was actually offering a free, unconditional pardon, that must have been a massive, life-altering relief.
A total weight lifted off his shoulders.
It is a beautiful internal realization of free grace. But he immediately crashes headfirst into the very unfree, very financial realities of the Catholic Church. Because right around 1516, a friar named Johann Tetzel rolls into Germany.
Tetzel. Oh, boy.
Yeah, Tetzel is there to sell indulgences. The Pope needs to fund the massively expensive rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the local archbishop has some serious debts to settle. So, to understand indulgences, we really have to understand purgatory.
Exactly. Purgatory was essentially a spiritual waiting room. The theology dictated that if you died with minor unconfessed sins, you weren't sent to hell, but you weren't ready for heaven either.
Right, you were stuck.
You went to purgatory to have your sins literally burned away.
Yeah.
And this could last for thousands of years. Is a terrifying prospect for people.
And the church offered a solution, right?
They did, by an indulgence. It was a certificate that acted as a spiritual cheat code, reducing your timer, or the timer of your deceased relatives, in purgatory.
So you are basically hearing your grandmother screaming in your head, and the church tells you that for a few coins, you can just end her torment.
It's incredibly manipulative.
And Tetzel was the ultimate salesman. He even had a catchy, horrifyingly effective marketing jingle. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
Yeah, it was a highly organized international extortion racket operating under the guise of salvation. And Luther, who had just experienced the profound relief of free grace, is absolutely appalled.
Which triggers the most famous event of his life. On October 31st, 1517, Luther writes a document called the 95 Theses.
A pivotal moment.
Now, the cinematic image we all have in our heads is Luther, hammer in hand, defiantly nailing the scroll to the heavy wooden doors of All Saints Church in Wittenberg while a storm rages in the background. But the source text actually throws a bucket of cold water on that visual.
What's fascinating here is that the dramatic door-nailing scene is heavily disputed by modern scholars. The biography points out that this legend was likely started much later by his collaborator, Philip Melanchthon.
Wait, really? So it might not have happened.
Probably not. And Melanchthon wasn't even living in Wittenberg in 1517. Luther most likely just mailed the theses to his superiors in a very standard, boring, bureaucratic way.
So the movie poster moment is probably fiction, but the blast radius of the document is absolute historical fact. And that explosion was entirely due to a technological marvel, the printing press.
This is crucial. I mean, Luther didn't sit down to overthrow the church. He wrote the theses in Latin, which was the language of the academic elite.
Right, not the language of the everyday person.
Exactly. The tone was searching and inquisitive. It was meant to initiate a standard university debate among scholars. He was just asking questions, not starting a war.
But the printing press operates like an uncontrollable, decentralized network, almost like early open source software, you know? Luther writes code in Latin. Local independent printers get their hands on it, realize it's incredibly controversial, and they know controversy sells.
Oh, they definitely knew it would sell.
So they independently translate it into the everyday German vernacular and print hundreds of copies for their own profit. Luther didn't authorize this at all.
Whoa.
But within weeks, his highly technical academic debate goes incredibly viral across Europe.
And suddenly, the Pope is not dealing with a quiet academic dispute in a backwater German university. He is dealing with a continent-wide PR disaster.
A nightmare for them.
The church realizes they cannot shut down the spread of information, so they respond by aggressively targeting the author. Over the next few years, there are fierce public debates and papal envoys dispatched to silence him.
And it escalates pretty quickly.
It does. It culminates in a papal bull, an official edict from the Pope basically threatening Luther with excommunication.
And Luther's response shows just how much his fear of that hangman god has vanished. He takes this incredibly powerful, terrifying papal document and he just publicly throws it into a bonfire. He sets it on fire.
Which forces the church's hand. By 1521, he is officially excommunicated, but the church can only kick him out of heaven. They need the secular state to physically stop him.
Because they don't have their own police force for this.
Right. This brings the conflict out of the spiritual realm and into a matter of immediate life and death.
Because burning the Pope's edict means you can't just be handled with angry letters anymore. The church calls in the ultimate secular authority. The Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V Luther, is summoned to the diet of worms.
And just to be clear, a diet wasn't a nutritional plan.
Right.
It was an imperial assembly, a gathering of the most powerful princes and nobles in the world, held in the city of worms.
You have to picture the power dynamics in that room. You have the emperor, a man who rules half the known world, seated on a throne, surrounded by heavily armed nobles and powerful cardinals.
Very intimidating.
And standing in the middle of the room is a single, lowly monk. They point to a table piled high with his viral writings and ask him a very simple binary question. Will you recant? Will you take it all back?
And he is terrified. He actually asks for a day to think about it. But when he returns, he delivers a speech that echoes through history. He looks at the most powerful men on earth and says, "My conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant."
Such a powerful moment. Though the source notes that the famous cinematic ending phrase, "Here I stand, I can do no other," is likely another later embellishment. But still, the core defiance was breathtakingly real.
And it was a death sentence. The emperor immediately issues the Edict of Worms, declaring Martin Luther a convicted heretic and a secular outlaw.
An outlaw.
Yeah, that specific legal status meant anyone, anywhere could murder him without facing any legal consequences whatsoever. It became a crime for anyone to even give him a crust of bread or a place to sleep. He was a dead man walking out of that assembly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Luther is traveling home through the dark German forests, presumably waiting for the inevitable assassin's blade, when heavily armed, masked horsemen ambush his carriage.
It sounds like a movie.
It totally does. They drag him out, throw him on a horse, and vanish into the night. It looks like the end. But the kidnapping was completely staged.
Yeah, it was a brilliant piece of geopolitical maneuvering by his local ruler, Prince Frederick III. Frederick the Wise.
Okay, so why did he do it?
Frederick recognized that protecting Luther was a way to assert local German power against the overreach of Rome and the emperor. So he has his own men stage the ambush. They smuggle Luther to the remote, fortified Wartburg castle.
That's incredible.
Luther grows out a massive beard, trades his monk's robes for a knight's tunic, and lives under the alias Junker Jörg.
It is essentially a 16th century witness protection program. He is locked away in a fortress, staring at the walls, but he uses that isolation to execute what might be his most enduring legacy.
Oh, definitely.
He sits down and translates the New Testament from its original Greek directly into vernacular German.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you begin to see why this translation was a sociological earthquake. At that time, Germany wasn't a unified nation. It was a fractured, messy collection of independent territories, and a Bavarian peasant could barely understand a Saxon merchant. The dialects were just vastly different.
Right, there was no German language as we think of it today. But Luther's translation acts as a massive linguistic anchor. Because his Bible was so wildly popular and printed in such massive quantities, people all across these fractured territories learned to read using his specific phrasing.
He accidentally standardized the German language.
Yeah. But more importantly, he completely democratized religion.
Exactly. Before this, the Bible was locked behind the Latin language, tightly controlled by the clergy. If you wanted to know what God said, you had to ask a priest.
And hope they told you the truth.
Right. Luther bypasses the entire institutional middleman. By putting the text into the hands of the everyday public, he gave them the intellectual tools to question authority for themselves.
But when you hand a decentralized tool of questioning to an oppressed population, you instantly lose control of the narrative. And while Luther is safely hidden away in his castle, his ideas escape into the wild and mutate.
They really mutate.
people start reading about Christian freedom, but they don't interpret it as spiritual freedom from purgatory. They interpret it as physical, economic freedom from their feudal overlords.
And we enter the era of the radical reformers. Groups like the Zwickau Prophets take Luther's critiques to their absolute extremes. They aren't just debating theology anymore. They are physically smashing religious statues, burning down chapels, and preaching total social revolution.
It perfectly mirrors what we see today when a prominent thinker or content creator shares an idea and their followers take it offline and twist it into something violently unrecognizable.
It's a tale as old as time.
This radicalization culminates in the German Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525. Impoverished peasants who have been brutally, heavily taxed and oppressed for generations use Luther's exact rhetoric to launch a bloody revolt against the nobility.
And you, listening to this, might expect Luther, the champion of the common man, to support them. But his reaction is violently the opposite.
It is genuinely shocking. He writes a vitriolic pamphlet titled "Against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants." He actively urges the ruling nobles to smite, slay, and stab the rebels in secret and in public.
Smite, slay, and stab. Very dark.
And the nobles take his advice. The uprising is crushed with terrifying, mechanized brutality. The source details that over 100,000 peasants are slaughtered, and Luther doesn't distance himself from the massacre. He actively claims responsibility.
Yeah, he does.
He writes, "It was I who ordered them to be struck dead." So I have to ask you, how does a man who preaches grace, who risked his life for the freedom of the Christian soul, justify calling for the mass slaughter of impoverished farmers?
It fundamentally comes down to two things: his theology and his sheer pragmatism.
Okay, let's hear it.
Theologically, Luther operated on the two kingdoms doctrine. He believed that while all humans are perfectly equal in the spiritual kingdom of heaven, God specifically ordained the secular authorities, the princes and nobles, to maintain brutal order in the physical world.
So rebelling against the state was rebelling against God.
Exactly. To rebel against the state was to rebel against God's structure. But practically, Luther knew his Reformation was highly vulnerable. The only reason he wasn't burned at the stake was because secular nobles like Prince Frederick protected him with their armies.
Ah, so he needed them.
If he allied with the peasants and the revolution failed, the Catholic Church would wipe out his religious movement entirely. He chose the survival of his theology over the lives of the peasants.
A deeply pragmatic, but incredibly bloody choice that completely alienated him from the working class. Now, amidst this societal chaos, his personal life takes a turn that is both surprisingly tender and structurally revolutionary. In 1525, he marries Katharina von Bora.
Yes, Katharina.
She was a former nun, and the story of how she escaped her convent sounds like a heist movie. Luther literally helps smuggle her and several other nuns out of hostile territory by hiding them inside a wagon full of empty herring barrels.
The visual of escaping a convent smelling like pickled fish is incredible. But the structural impact of that escape is massive. By smuggling those nuns out and subsequently marrying Katharina, Luther was physically dismantling the socioeconomic infrastructure of the Catholic Church.
Because convents and monasteries were huge centers of land, wealth, and power.
Right. And he replaces that medieval structure with something entirely new: the Protestant nuclear family. Katharina wasn't just a quiet wife. She managed their massive estate, ran a brewery, and handled the finances while Luther built the institutions of the new church.
They were a real team.
They were. He writes timeless hymns like "A Mighty Fortress Is You, God," and creates catechisms so parents can teach their own children. They establish the new societal ideal of the pastor's family.
But building an entirely new institution from scratch takes a severe physical and mental toll. As we move into the final chapters of Luther's life, the biography paints a picture of a man whose influence is growing, but whose body is failing. And his rhetoric becomes increasingly rigid, authoritarian, and dangerously hateful.
His health was an absolute nightmare. He was plagued by Meniere's disease, which causes crippling vertigo, alongside kidney stones and angina.
So he lived his final decades in constant, agonizing pain.
Yeah, and as his body broke down, his patience vanished. We see this immense theological stubbornness at the Marburg Colloquy in 1529.
The colloquy was intended to be a diplomatic summit to unify the various Protestant factions against the Catholic emperor, right?
That was the goal. Luther sat down with Ulrich Zwingli, a prominent Swiss reformer. They managed to agree on 14 out of 15 major theological points. The only sticking point was the Eucharist communion.
Okay, what was the disagreement?
Zwingli argued that the bread and wine were purely symbolic representations of Christ. Luther absolutely insisted that Christ was physically, literally present in the elements.
And Luther refuses to engage in any diplomatic nuance. He literally takes a piece of chalk and writes the Latin phrase, "This is my body," directly onto the wooden table.
Very dramatic.
He points to it and refuses to budge a single inch. When Zwingli tries to debate the semantics, Luther snaps, "German necks don't break that easily."
Whoa.
His absolute, unyielding certainty single-handedly prevents a unified Protestant political alliance.
And that same absolute certainty begins to severely warp his moral judgment. A few years later, he secretly advises a crucial political ally, Philip of Hesse, to commit bigamy to take a second wife to satisfy his political and personal desires.
Wow.
Yeah. Luther then explicitly instructs Philip to tell a good, strong lie to cover it up when the rumors start. When the truth inevitably leaks, it severely damages Luther's moral credibility.
But the bigamy scandal pales in comparison to the most disturbing and darkest chapter of his later years. And we need to be incredibly clear with you listening. We are reporting impartially on the horrific historical facts detailed in the source text, because you cannot understand the mechanics of history if you look away from the darkest parts of it.
Right. It's tough, but necessary. In 1543, just 3 years before his death, Luther authored a massive 60,000-word tract titled On the Jews and Their Lies. It is a vitriolic, violently anti-Semitic document.
It's awful.
Luther had originally hoped that by reforming Christianity, the Jewish people would naturally convert to his new, pure version of the faith. When they categorically refused, his disappointment curdled into violent rage.
And what did he write in this tract?
In the text, he explicitly advocated for setting fire to their synagogues, destroying their prayer books, seizing their personal property, and forcing their expulsion from the land.
So, what does this all mean? Look, it's tempting for apologists to try and sweep this under the rug. Some might argue that his hateful writings were just the byproduct of a man suffering from terrible physical pain, or write him off as a grumpy, dying man lashing out. Does the biographical source let him off the hook with that excuse?
No, it categorically does not. The source makes it abundantly clear that while his physical pain was real, these writings were not a temporary lapse in judgment. They reflected a deeply ingrained cultural and theological prejudice.
It's important not to make excuses for it.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the biography points out the terrifying long-term mechanics of weaponized language. Centuries later, those exact writings were eagerly resurrected and celebrated by the Nazi Party.
That's horrifying.
During the Nuremberg rallies, Luther's tracts were publicly exhibited as historical justification for modern atrocities. It is a stark, terrifying reminder of how a historical figure's absolute certainty can be weaponized by future generations to justify unimaginable horrors.
Yeah.
The source does rightfully note that modern Lutheran denominations have strictly and repeatedly repudiated those specific writings, labeling them a profound sin. But the historical stain is permanent.
It is a profoundly heavy, deeply complicated legacy. Luther passes away a few years later, in 1546, in the very same town where he was born. And the final piece of paper discovered near his deathbed contained a scribbled mix of Latin and German. The final sentence read, "We are beggars, this is true."
It is a striking final note. After single-handedly shaking the geopolitical and spiritual foundations of the Western world, his final conscious thought was a quiet return to his core discovery.
That before the judgment of God, humanity has absolutely nothing of value to offer. You cannot buy grace, you're simply a beggar receiving a gift.
Right.
It is an incredible, violent, and turbulent narrative arc. And it brings us to why you should care about this 500-year-old story today. Martin Luther's life is the ultimate historical case study in causality.
It really is.
It shows how a single person's deeply internal psychological crisis of conscience can literally reshape the language, the socioeconomic power structures, and the fundamental beliefs of the globe. It is proof that decentralized ideas possess unimaginable, uncontrollable power.
Yet it serves as an equally profound warning. It reveals the terrifying dark side of absolute certainty.
Because the exact same stubborn, unyielding conviction that gave a terrified monk the courage to stand up to the most powerful emperor on earth also made him ruthlessly cruel to anyone who disagreed with him.
Exactly, leading to horrific rhetoric and genuine real-world slaughter.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought to chew on regarding the mechanics of history itself. Johannes Gutenberg invented the mechanical printing press just a few decades before Luther was born.
Okay, yeah.
If that specific piece of decentralized technology didn't exist, if Luther's 95 Theses couldn't go viral, bypassing the institutional gatekeepers to spread across Europe in a matter of weeks, would he have just been another forgotten friar with a complaint nailed to a wooden door, quietly executed by the church?
This raises an important question that is incredibly relevant today. Does the new technology create the revolution, or does the individual? Can a brilliant spark actually light a fire if the dry kindling of a revolutionary new medium isn't already there waiting to catch it?
It is absolutely something to think about the next time a radically new idea goes viral on your feed, and it brings us right back to where we started. A terrified law student lying in the mud during a thunderstorm, making a desperate promise to the sky.
He thought he was just trying to save his own soul from the lightning.
But he ended up electrifying the entire world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.